welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Robert. It's me, Jacqueline.
And hello, it's me, Diana.
And we're also joined by...
Alan Haberman, the book club guy.
And if Alan Haberman, the book club guy, is here, then this must mean we're recording a book club.
Book club, book club, book club.
And not just any book club, folks. We are recording a Supervision book club. So what's going on? It's September, but book clubs are usually one of those Patreon thingies I've heard so much about. Well, let me tell you. First, I'll remind new listeners who get to hear a great description about a podcast they're trying out for the first time. This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss, unless it's September, in which case every week the topic is supervision and related supervisory goals and objectives and skills. And sometimes we do these extra special long book clubs for our Patreon listeners. But because we love supervision and because we love book clubs, we said, let's take two great tastes that go great together and do a supervision book club and open it up for everyone out there. So if you are listening on the Patreon feed, you won't have an episode next week because you just get a full-length 2-hour book club right now. And as a special subscription bonus, you get 2 CEs, supervision CEs, for listening to the whole thing. If you're listening on the free feed, you have 2 options. 1, enjoy this episode and get your code words, and you can get 1 supervision CE for this episode. And then come back next week for part 2 of our book club. And then the same applies. Or you can go to the link that's going to be handy dandy in the notes, and you could actually subscribe on our Patreon to get the whole thing right now, plus all of our other book clubs, including our last one, Street Data, and free CEs, or CEs at no additional cost for subscribing, as well as everything a week ahead of time. So a lot of cool benefits there. But no matter which way you slice it, we're talking book club, we're talking supervision, we're talking crucial conversations. They need a book for me called Crucial Podcast Introductions, because that was a lot there. So I'm holding the book up like you all need to remember what book we read.
Can I just say one thing about this book?
Yes.
I think that what they present in the book is crucial, was really important to having really difficult conversations. But man, I did not like how it was written. The writing style made me want to throw the book out the window.
Jackie, I want you to take that back because I wanted to be, for the first time ever, I wanted to be the grump in the book club who didn't like the book.
I actually liked the book. I actually love this book. And I'm going to use it in a lot of different areas of my life, but I just didn't like how it was written.
Okay.
Like the cadence and the style. It just was like, I'm not your buddy, dude. Like, I'm not at your house sitting on your couch drinking a beer. That's kind of what I felt like.
Not your bro, man.
Okay.
It definitely had very how to make friends and influence people to some extent. And like, I don't think I'm the audience for this book. And that maybe the audience for this book is a whole different group of people that maybe we don't see in behavior analysis all that much, but I don't know.
Well, let's get a little bit more into what the book is before everyone listening is so excited for the next 2 hours of content. So
no, I think there's a lot of good stuff in this book.
Okay. All
yeah,
right.
I love the content of this book. I am using it again I'm using it in my classroom. I'm using it for a lunch and learn that I have to present to my faculty. I'm going to use it in my real life. I just don't like how it's written. But the content, I think, is good.
The tone of the writing.
Yeah.
Okay. And I agree. I was first handed this book by a principal because I was supervising 5 paraprofessionals in a public school. She's like, you're probably going to need this because you're probably going to have to talk to your staff more than I do. So here you go. So I definitely learned and have, gone back to this book a couple times, at least early in my career.
All right. Way to backpedal, you guys. It sounds like you're taking the safety route or the silence route in our crucial conversation.
No, they just took the middle. They took the good. That was good.
Okay, you did the good. All right,
I'm
we're gonna
good.
do the best.
Actually, Rob, I took the you weren't listening because that's exactly what I said in the beginning, is that I love the content, but I didn't love the tone.
Jackie, your feedback sandwich is making me feel unsafe. Take a step back. You got to reappraise.
What's this book about?
What's this book? Oh, it's about all sorts of things, folks. Crucial Conversations is so I think in terms of the tone, this is a business book. I think this is presented to various businesses. It made its way, like Alan said, into schools. That's where actually I was first introduced to a copy. There was a whole row of about 20 that they'd ordered in my district that just sat across from my desk. And then one day I said, Crucial Conversations. Someone mentioned that book, like John Austin or somebody mentioned that as a good supervision book to read. And I've had 40 of them staring at me for 5 years. I better read this book.
But then you try to take them off the shelf and they're just one large.
They just melt
They're like
together.
No, where it's like a fake book.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like it just is like a bunch of spines.
Well,
and they're all
inside-
connected together and there's no actual books inside.
Was a map to the secret Massachusetts public school treasure. But that's another story. Right now we're talking Crucial Conversations. What? That's maybe a more interesting story. So this is a book about in business, but really in any relationship, whether it's going to be as supervisor to supervisee, supervisor to client, when you're modeling difficult conversations, maybe with parents, stakeholders, other clientele in a consulting means, and you're kind of modeling that for your supervisees. And when emotions are high and stakes are high, you have a crucial conversation. And this is a book all about, well, what do you do in those situations to avoid doing what most of us do in a tough conversation, which is either be kind of a jerk, run away from the conversation, or sort of just acquiesce in kind of like a really milquetoast way and then be grumpy about the fact that you didn't get what you wanted out of the conversation and sort of do a poor job at whatever the final outcome was. There's a couple other ones too we'll go over, but that's basically the gist of it. This book was written way back in the old days. 2002 was the first edition of this book. There was an update in 2012. That was the edition I actually read before I realized there was a third edition. There was a lot of summer vacation back and forth here. So we're going to be talking a lot about the second and third editions, sort of what changed. But I think that provides us some perspective. I think that's a little fun, like we did with Nudge. And then the third edition is the most recent one, just came out in 2021, and that has 2 additional chapters. They sort of reordered a number of chapters. A lot of the content is the same, but it does try to get at both a different kind of temporal framework of how do you have a crucial conversation? What are the steps involved? Which I didn't, I kind of read the second edition and then skimmed over some of the differences, and it didn't do much for me. And a little bit more, as they said, modern conversation skills in terms of, how do you have a crucial conversation over email or on the telephone, the newfangled telephone that they created. DMs were mentioned.
They didn't, to be honest, they didn't do as much of that as I thought they were going to.
I would hope they wouldn't, because if you're thinking I better have a very high stakes, high emotion conversation, guess what are some mediums that are terrible to have a crucial conversation over?
They say that. Go ahead, Alan.
But I was like, but since the revision was in 2021, we're living in an era where having a phone call or a Zoom call is better than an email or a text message or a DM, because in person may not be an option. So
very good point.
Right.
And they did mention, I think they did put in some it almost more like safety valves of if you're in this situation and everything seems to be going bad, here are some ways that you can sort of, not take control of the conversation, but, recreate safety conditions for having these conversations in those media. I personally am lucky to be old enough. I never thought I'd say this, but I probably can get away with, I'm not going to have a crucial conversation over a DM. I'm much too old. I won't do it. But maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. The book was written by Carrie Patterson, Joseph Grenny, Ron McMillan, and Al Switzler. And if you're reading the third edition, they added a new author, Emily Gregory, who had been working with them in their consulting firm. Basically, the 4 of them made a company called Vital Smarts. It's a social science-based training group for corporations created in the late 80s. And now it's called Crucial Learning. Yeah, 5 authors.
There's 5
now.
of them.
Yeah, but the original 4 authors before Emily Gregory came on as the 5th. Now it's called Crucial Learning because you got to get that branding consistent. Vital Smarts. So if you're reading the second
Vital
edition,
Smart sounds like a blender.
it just sounds like I need some vitamins from Vital Smarts. Crucial Learning. Oh, that goes with the Crucial Conversations. They claim that tons of Forbes Global 2000 companies have taken these courses to learn about flexibility and learning and conversations. They've written some other books about habits, being an influencer, getting things done. All of them, some of them, I found this very funny. I was looking into, do any of them have degrees in social science? And it seems like most of them did a lot of work related to like kind of business and communications, but two of them mentioned they're proteges of Albert Bandura, which made me wonder, like, were they in his lab or something? Like, what's going on? I didn't think any of them were like that old. But it does seem like they mostly just sort of like Bandura's social science outlook on life and bring it to their...
He's also not that old. He's still alive. He's only in his 70s.
Oh, I guess it could have timed out. I mean, these guys are actually probably in their 70s too, though. So maybe they wouldn't have been in his lab because they were all too young.
He passed away in 2021, just so you know.
Oh, he just did?
Let's do that again.
Okay. You want to go back? Let's go back. Dan, go back a little bit. So I thought it was, so two of them are like Bandura proteges. And I was like, did they study with Bandura? But it seems like they just are like huge fans, like fanboys of Bandura. And they mentioned him as a big influence on them, but it doesn't seem like they ever like worked with him. So their background seems more business to social science.
Yeah, he died in July 26, 2021.
Oh, R.I.P. So we've got our authors. It's a business book, but again, it's been making the rounds for 20 years, or almost 20 years. 20 years now. We've got our updated third edition. We kind of talked about some of the differences. And we're going to go into sort of how you can hold a crucial conversation according to the authors here, and then kind of our own take. There's a couple areas here where there's some room for practice. There's like a test you can take to learn kind of your style or where you should focus. So there was, in some regards, I think this was a really doing book. It was very focused on your listening and then doing some exercises related to it, and an understanding that the people reading this book, no matter who you are, if you're told, if you don't remember these 10 steps to crucial conversations, you're going to fail. I think in the end, they come down to there are 2 points of crucial conversations. So if you learn 2 things in this podcast, you'll have done 100% of what the authors hope you did in reading their entire book. And you just had to listen to our podcast about it. How exciting. But I agree with everyone. The tone is very non-hard sciences in that there are lots of anecdotes, which I find helpful for a topic like a conversation, because it does give lots of models of these are some phrases that you might want to use in terms of, I'm just checking in with you on, or can I read the room about this, phrases that you can kind of go back to as sort of canned responses to hit some of the goals they had. But I also think there are way too many acronyms in this book that make it very hard when they start referring to other chapters in the book. At least for me, I had to keep looking back and remembering, what are they talking about? Like, what does this acronym mean? And then in the third edition, they added another acronym.
It was too many acronyms.
Too many acronyms.
So the one thing that I really liked is, so it's at the end of the book, the last chapter was like, if you forget all of these things, and this is not in the second edition, it's only in the third edition. If you forget all of these things, you don't need to remember the acronyms, but just remember what you're like when you have to start a conversation and then read the room. But they were like, remember these 2 things. And if you forget everything else, you'll probably do okay. And I kind of like that chapter. So I think if you read nothing else, read that chapter. And I think that last chapter, it's called Putting It All Together. And it gives us some real life scenarios on how you might need to have a crucial conversation. And as I was thinking, because one of my behavior analyst friends is reading this, I went to her house and it was on her desk, and I'm like, I'm reading that. She's like, everyone in my agency is reading this book right now. And I was like, how timely. They can listen to the podcast. But as a supervisor in a behavior analytic agency, I think that last chapter would be really helpful. And using those role play scenarios in the last chapter, you could simplify them, I was thinking, and using them as ways to practice having critical conversations with your RBTs and with your behavior therapists, so that you wouldn't have to make your own. I mean, they're not completely applicable, but you can change some language around. So when we get to the second part, I really want to talk about that. But I thought that would be really nice because we know that we can't just read a book and then automatically we're going to be a good supervisor, right? Research suggests that we have to actually engage in the behavior. We need to receive reinforcement for the behavior, whether it's, from our supervisees or from our supervisor. And then we need to, modify our behavior. So I think practicing, the more times we practice this crucial conversations, I think the better we'll get at them.
Mm-hmm.
I am glad that you brought that up, Jackie, because that's what kept coming to my mind as I was reading this book. I'm like, yeah, these are great suggestions. And I like, the little vignettes that they put in there. I'm like, these people did a great job of using the language that was suggested by the authors because it's like a fictional case, but it doesn't mean that I'm then going to be able to just by reading this book go in and do a good job with these types of really hard conversations. Because there's a lot going on in those moments and you're not always thinking clearly. So as I think we know from our field, the worst time to try to learn something is when the stakes are high and either there's a really strong EO present or there's additional sort of emotional responding present.
So in a crucial conversation.
And a crucial conversation is one of those times. Exactly. So if you're thinking that you're just going to read this book and then boom, you know how to have a crucial conversation, you're missing that critical step of doing role play and feedback. And if there are scenarios that are included, then that is a great way to practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going to add that I think that the fact that they do have, they're not behaviorists, but the fact that Bandura is someone that they hearken to, that it's behaviorally informed, sort of their framework and their mindset. And I think they sort of do a good job of opening up with just like any book like this where they're trying to be like helpful, but also speak to an audience that is not necessarily like social science keen, balance that sort of operational definition that we like and that formalism with accessibility. But, like they sort of go off the bat and give you sort of 3 things to keep in mind, which is, that's great. It's sort of pinpoints or that kind of values to sort of to run off of, the opinions vary, the stakes are high, emotions run strong. Those are 3 things to always remember when you're having these crucial conversations. So I think there's definitely that side of things does make this accessible and useful to behavior analysts who are trying to do supervision and be, sort of behavioral in the way that they do things. And this book is very much based on practice and how you act and what you do. Like your thoughts, they stay inside, and how you treat people is what matters. Mm-hmm. So I think that does come through and is why it would be useful for people that are trying to be better behavior analysts, mm-hmm. especially if they're younger or newer to the field and having these kinds of conversations.
Yeah. To piggyback on what you were saying, Alan, I did find it surprising their description of kind of, conceptualizing the thought. They're using metaphor, a lot of metaphor. So they're really talking about, your stories. What stories are you telling in a conversation? But a lot of it had a real tinge of, they're talking about, thought versus your action. And they're these are 2 separate things. They're talking about sort of, defusing from the story you're telling yourself. They're sort of talking about value-directed action a little bit, which I thought was actually well done for a book that was really just trying to sort of take a metaphor and focus on the action. I don't know if they purposefully meant these things to, if that's their conception of the story as being sort of, thoughts versus your actions, whether they meant it to be kind of in that sort of psychological flexibility mindset, or whether they really were just trying to get people to be like, remember, what you're thinking is not what's necessarily happening. You don't have all the information. If they were just sort of trying to give it a metaphor that would be readily accessible to their audience. I do not know. I don't know their background. I mean, again, the Bandura love makes me think perhaps it was trying to target some psychological flexibility ideas in for an audience that is not looking for a psychology book. But that your mileage may vary on your interpretation of those sections. But I did find them to be, in line with I think a lot of my own conceptualization of what are thoughts and how do thoughts work with actions? They're not the same thing. That kind of idea. All right. Any other starting thoughts, or should we get right into the meat of the old book?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So we've got an interesting foreword with a great quote. You know me, folks. If you listen to a lot of these book clubs, if you don't have a great quote in your intro or your conclusion, your book, I'm like Jackie, I'm throwing your book out the window. It's not happening. And it was an Arnold Boynbee, who's a historian, quote, "Nothing fails like success," referring to the idea that as you take on a role, perhaps you're a new supervisor, or perhaps you're a supervisor that realizes in self-reflection, I'm terrible at having tough conversations. How am I supposed to effectively supervise? But you've been able to be a good clinician all these years. This is a new challenge, which means you can't just do what you know how to do. You might have to learn new skill sets, and talking with people, giving feedback, and going beyond giving feedback. Having uncomfortable conversations is a new skill that it's going to take more than listening to our podcast and reading the book. It's going to take practice. But right now, you're just listening to the podcast. So we're just going to give you that part of it right now.
Step one.
Step one, finish listening to the podcast. And when we talk about crucial conversations, I think the authors make a big point of making it clear. This comes up a lot when they're talking about safety in conversations, when they're talking about mutual purpose in conversations. The goal of a crucial conversation is not to get your way or let someone else have their way so that you stay safe or you get to avoid an unpleasant situation. It's create what they call a middle way. And by middle way, they also don't mean, which maybe means this was not the greatest metaphor to use or simile to use, but they don't just mean a compromise. Because when I first read that, I said, yeah, middle way, I guess I don't get my way, you don't get your way, but we're not that mad at each other. It's not a compromise. They want you. It's kind of going back to, I think, Carnegie's idea of, being genuine in interactions, of this higher middle way. So think about it like a triangle. Here's your opinion, here's their opinion. And by having a meaningful, crucial conversation, you're going to create a middle point that's better than either of the side points. Better being, somewhat subjective, but it's going to be like a blending, more so than a compromise. So think about it like a triangle, which that kind of helped me understand what the purpose of the book was. So I did actually find it to be a foreword that told me something about what I was going to read in the book, which is not always true, of many forewords. Which leads us into our first chapter. What is a crucial conversation? And we talked.
At least they're going to define it.
Yes.
Right? If you've listened to Street Data, it took them a long time to get to the definition.
Was it chapter 4 before?
So we're jumping right in with the definition of the title.
And Diana, what is that definition?
A discussion between two or more people in which they hold opposing opinions about a high-stakes issue and where emotions run strong.
Yes, thank you, Alan.
Then, if you need the figure, it's there. I also found the figures in this book highly irrelevant.
We just talked about that triangle for like a minute. It's great. We love it. For those of you not here, which is everyone, there's a triangle, triangle figure that Jackie is showing us from one of the early pages. Yes, so stakes are high, emotions are high, you disagree. These are the situations. I think we can all think of a conversation we've had in the past, I bet 6 months, that met 2, if not all 3 of these criteria. And like Diana, like you were saying, you don't know you're in a crucial conversation if you haven't prepared for being in a crucial conversation, unless you find yourself suddenly surprised it's a crucial conversation. And since emotions are high, you're probably responding emotionally, which means you're probably not responding very effectively. And you're turning what should be making that middle path into either a win or lose situation, or you are avoiding it because it is such an aversive conversation that you just flat out avoid it, which is going to lead to repercussions down the line if you're doing supervision or you're working with other people, in that you are upset with them forever because you didn't get your way and you think they did you wrong by having a crucial conversation without giving you a lot of warning, right? Or you are working on something and then you decide, well, I'll just sort of half-ass my way through it, and that'll show them that I didn't like the way our conversation went, which of course it won't. And then you get to have a crucial conversation about your half-assing your job. It's a nasty spiral, folks. It's important that we face our crucial conversations and do so productively rather than in a way that is going to either, like I said, have you feel like a loser and then respond poorly, or demand to be a winner, which will also lead to your responding poorly.
That's not the way to success.
Whoever wins,
Demand
we lose.
to be a winner.
I want to write that book. Demand to be a winner. A toxic white man's guide to the workplace.
Yeah.
That I should have written 30 or 40 years ago if I wanted it to be, have anyone not laugh it out of the room.
If anyone can write it, Rob, it's you.
So that's what a crucial
Rob
conversation
does own
is.
a shirt that says, "I'm not wrong, I'm Rob."
That's right. Very true. So
I bought it for you.
You did buy it for me to make fun of me.
Yes.
See, if you don't have crucial conversation, folks, your wife's just going to buy you shirts that make you look like a jerk. You don't want that.
One thing I did like about this chapter is the little aside. It's like, you need to have crucial conversations going through divorce. And a little,
We're not going to be
That does
discussing
seem like a
divorce
pretty
conversations
clear-
in this podcast. It's very analytic.
Clearly high stakes.
That's high stakes. You might definitely disagree.
I just want to interject that actually you might have to have a divorce-based conversation as a behavior analyst because you may have a family that's going through such a conversation and you're informing it. So I'm just saying.
It could happen. You're right. It could definitely happen. So we have our situations where most people, and if you think back to, not to knock any of all your listeners' supervisors, but many of them may not have been great at having crucial conversations when you think about it. Maybe they just, through force of will, got their way done. Maybe through passiveness, sort of just allowed things to happen and then stewed about it later. Or maybe they were stoic and you had no idea what their opinion was, but they never got their way in conversations, and that can't have been good long term, right? So it's not a skill that we're taught necessarily. And even I think when you're talking about something like BST, where we talk about giving feedback, that's a very narrow window. I know they talk about feedback a little bit in the third edition of the book, but like feedback's a very narrow window in terms of a crucial conversation. And it may not even be a crucial conversation in many ways, because especially with new supervisees or when you're modeling, say, working with paraprofessionals, the odds are, a lot of times you're giving feedback in the context of, observation, where there's expected feedback, so opinions might not be different. And if you do it enough and well enough, hopefully emotions are not running high. So I think this may go beyond a lot of what we think of with like tough conversations we're having. And really the whole point of this book was the people who are the best and everyone loves at work are the ones who can have crucial conversation. They do have some stats to back that up. A lot of them came from the medical field, where they looked at people who reported that they saw people breaking rules, taking shortcuts, didn't say anything about it because it was uncomfortable. That 84% of respondents in their survey, I believe, of nurses and doctors, they didn't mention it. And they've gotten so good, they say, at looking at teams and businesses that they can predict with 90% accuracy which teams are going to fail based on the number of crucial conversations that should have happened and then didn't happen. And a lot of those times when there was failure, we're talking about, some of the medical teams where there could be injury or death, where there was the loss of money, where colleagues who were toxic to a team just sort of continued to engage in bad behavior until probably something really terrible happened. And then someone eventually did something about it. But most likely, what did they do? They said, oh, this isn't working. Let's make a bunch of new teams. But again, all you've done is take a bunch of bad actors or some bad actors and just reorganize them. But no one's having that conversation about how to actually improve the workplace environment. So there are lots of situations where crucial conversations should be happening and are not. And there are some real impacts to businesses, both from a financial, but also from a personal and safety standpoint. Like Jackie said, divorce too.
In this chapter, they do, they talk about, this may be helpful if someone is saying things to you that are meaning or degrading or potentially racist or harassing. And one thing I appreciate is that they were like, you don't have to take that, right? They were like, if somebody is sexually harassing you, you can just tell HR it's okay. You don't have to have a crucial conversation if you don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. Like you can tell someone that this is happening. And I appreciated that, right? Because it's not always going to be beneficial for you to engage in that conversation if that person is not also willing to engage in that conversation. Mm-hmm. Straight, right?
Yeah, and that comes up, I think.
Oh yeah, the MO needs to be there in order for the conversation to happen on both sides.
Yeah. And in some of the later sections talking about safety or making safe environments, they do get a little bit more specific as to the situations in which, like you're saying, Jackie, crucial conversations no good. This is a reportable offense that needs to be tackled by other, possibly by other professionals. Because like you said, if you don't want to talk about it or someone doesn't want to come up with a middle ground, a higher middle ground, then it's not a crucial conversation.
I was going to say they do touch base on, again, the sort of post-COVID world in this chapter because they talk about having crucial conversations and having a team that can do it substantially increase trust and reduce transaction cost in virtual work teams. People who can't handle their crucial conversations suffer through backstabbing, gossip, undermining, passive aggression up to 3 times more often in virtual teams than in co-located teams, which, they don't have a citation on that statistic, but it feels sensible that virtual teams might need more of these kinds of conversations because people are just not in the same place having some of these avoiding some of these less productive conversations. So I thought that was interesting. They don't really draw attention to it, but it felt relevant in the COVID era.
All right. So we know what a crucial conversation is and that it has some importance. But what was sort of the process of this book? And I didn't reread this chapter in the 3rd edition, so please let me know if it was different here. But they have this great anecdote. Is Kevin in the 3rd edition? Did he make it in? I should have double checked.
I think he does.
Okay, good. So they tell this great story about going to different organizations, and they just asked employees, who's the most influential person in the company? And some people got nominated. It was Kevin was nominated 30 plus times. And they pretty much just anyone who was nominated by tons of people, and by tons like 30 or more times, got to be observed by at least 4 of these authors, possibly 5, for the 3rd edition. And they just kind of observed their behavior. And they give the example of Kevin, who what was everyone's image of Kevin? I kind of saw him as like this like dude bro. I don't know why. Just like he was just super chill.
But he was in chapter 2. He was in chapter 2 in the 3rd edition and not in chapter 1. But
he was in chapter 2 for both. Yeah.
Yeah. So I imagined him as like a less than middle-aged guy that wears buttons down with the sleeves rolled up and sneakers.
He seemed very cool, too cool for school. In their anecdote, and they described Kevin as they observing him, and he didn't really do anything that was that special. They just watched him. He did what everyone else was doing. He didn't really seem to like excel in any sort of way that was noticeable. But what they noticed was patterns of when crucial conversations came up, he seemed able to handle them in a way that avoided taking what they call the fool's choice. They're going to bring that term up a bunch in the book. And the fool's choice is the idea that when we enter a conversation that is a crucial conversation, so again, stakes high, emotions high, differing opinions, a lot of us will believe, well, I have to speak up and say my truth, and I don't care who gets mad about it. Or everyone's an idiot, they're making a bad decision, but I can't say anything because it'll just make the situation worse. So I'll just sit here quietly and fume about it. So, the example of, then they give the example of like when someone's wearing an ugly shirt and you're either going to have to tell them like, that's the worst shirt. And then like get on a soapbox about how their taste is bad, or because of course they're going to be mad at you for telling your opinion, or you have to just say, you look great and then be upset about it and, not try to ruin your relationship. So this fake dichotomy that a lot of us go into. And Kevin in the meeting, I forget his exact phrase, it was something like, let me run something by you, boss. Like, oh, this Kevin sounds really awesome just to work with. But he was able to share his story, which we'll get into and the authors get into in later chapters. He never did it in a way that felt like he was doing anything other than trying to reach a mutual goal, and was allowing a flow of information between all of the parties. So he wasn't trying to save anyone's face. He was just trying to help the group kind of make a goal by expressing an opinion being willing to share unpopular ideas and views in what the authors refer to as a dialogue, which was a term I did not like because I had to keep remembering what they were talking about. But in their definition, it is the free flow of meaning between two or more people. So the Kevins of the world could do this. And the rest of us hoi polloi keep making the fool's choice. So how do we all become Kevins in the world? Then becomes the rest.
I didn't really see him as like a bro the way you guys are describing him. I saw him as like a fairly like unassuming kind of guy who's not there to make friends. Who's like not automatically the cool guy.
So he was a cast member of the real world.
What?
He wasn't there to make friends.
Is that what they say?
He's got to stop being polite and start getting real.
Like Puck.
So super cool. Like Puck from the real world.
There's a reference.
I felt he was the anti-Lumberg from Office Space. Like he was a person you'd actually like to come and talk to you. I mean,
yeah,
it does have a little bit of a Carnegie feel, like the way that he's like, I'm going to have this conversation with you and it's going to be your idea, or you're like, I'm giving you the opportunity. Like, I'm not pointing out your mistake directly. I'm letting you engage in a dialogue about your mistake.
Yeah. And then, of course, at the end of the meeting, the boss goes, Kevin, thank you so much. You've saved our company. He's like, hey, don't worry about it, boss.
The one thing I tried to think of is if I have a Kevin where I work.
I don't know. I'm trying to think if I have any.
Does anyone have a Kevin where they work? I
don't want to say because I kind of was jealous of Kevin because he just seemed to just effortlessly go through this book and he just could have these crucial conversations and he just had it. He had the skill. Where'd he get it? I don't know. I got to go back to my story, right?
Maybe he read the book.
Maybe he read but they saw Kevin before they wrote the book.
I worked with a teacher in public schools who was the building union rep. And she had a very good way of being forthright but disarming. And, I think she used the fact that she'd been doing it for so long and she'd been at this site for so long to be a anchor in the conversation of like, this is a big enough of a problem that I am talking to you about it because I care about this school, and please refer back to how much I care about this school, and was very good about sort of making it about like, this is what's best for our community, and someone has to say it. And so please give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm not attacking you as the administrator. It's about participating in our community. Mm-hmm. And she was really good at that.
And Alan, I think your point, you point out your example of someone who was good at the crucial conversations in a workplace. I think we've all had good crucial conversations. So for anyone listening who has given feedback to a supervisee in the context of an observation, and the supervisee nodded and said, "Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's great." They may have just been saying that because you're the supervisor, but odds are they accepted and appreciated your feedback because the context you gave it in was one of, I clearly want you to do a good job. So I think the crucial conversations that we've all done well in, we can't all be Kevin right away, but on our journey, are the ones in which it's obvious from just the context alone that we want to reach the same goal and we want to help you, whoever we're having the conversation with. And those are the settings in which we've probably done some of these steps. So I don't think there's really anything in this book that jumps out as like, I've never thought of that ever. But it's putting it all together and then practicing it in situations that just hearing about them or throwing them out. Hey, everyone, let's talk about that time you were in a meeting and the boss was doing something terrible and everyone was looking at everyone else going, "What? This person's crazy. They can't do that." And you got too scared to say anything. Like, nobody wants to be there. But you can and probably have done some of these steps. It's just the putting it all together. This kind of gets back to another one of their metaphors, which is the metaphor of the pool of shared meaning, which they're going to come back to again, which again gets that mutual purpose of thinking about conversations as looking at how do I grow this pool of meaning, this information. Let's assume everyone we're working with is a smart person who will come up with a good idea This kind of sounds like nudge in a little way, but there's too much information and some of it is hidden. But if we could just get out important pieces of information that everyone could see, I know we would all come together and come up with a really good solution that maybe none of us had thought of already. Rather than I've got a pool of information and that's my pool of information and it's the good pool of information. Those other pools are bad pools. They don't have enough chlorine, or they have too little chlorine, too much chlorine. They're bad pools, don't go in them. My pool is the best pool. That's when you're going to not be having a crucial conversation so much as being kind of a jerk and not really lending yourself to more shared meaning. So
another thing that I thought about shared meaning too was how I interpreted it is that both of you want the same thing, right? Like the outcome is you both have the intention of the similar outcome, right? Like you want your classroom to function better. You want your supervisor to do a good job. Your supervisee wants to do a good job, right? So making sure that everyone understands what the outcome is before you have the conversation and that you're both trying to get there. Yeah.
Which can also be a problem when sometimes you might find you don't share a mutual purpose. But again, they have a whole chapter about that, which is much later in the book. So we have a goal. We want to be able to enter these crucial conversations by making a pool of shared meaning, by engaging in a dialogue. But then the question becomes, if it were so easy, we would all just naturally do it. So authors, go ahead. Let's go over all of their steps for doing so, which starts with the next section of the book, part 1, what to do before you open your mouth.
One thing that I liked about this book and other books that I've read about having conversations related to, having conversations about microaggressions and race and racism and harassment and, having conversations with your coworkers is that a lot of the work actually happens before you even get to the conversation. And that was something surprising to me when I started reading. I'm like, yeah, you're just going to get the conversation going. But no, right? There's so much work that has to be done prior to even considering having the conversation. Like you need to be doing a lot of work. You need to be setting the stage. You need to be setting the relevant SDs and MOs up place. You need to set up the relevant consequences, right, for when that conversation is going to take place. So that was something that was really surprising to me.
So while we mentioned there are 2 big take-homes that you definitely want to have, those are more of the in emergency break glass take-homes. If you want to be good at the skill, there's more to it, and it starts. Don't just jump into a crucial conversation tomorrow and think I'm gonna nail it now. I heard a podcast about a book I didn't read, and I might have heard only half of the podcast, so I'm probably ready.
And I was just going to add about talking about the pool of shared meaning. I mean, thinking about why we're talking about this book, hopefully that we have a common goal of our clients' well-being or the integrity of our field. Those are sort of 2 big areas that I see that crucial conversations might have to come up. I mean, the number of times I've had to tell a parent that unfortunately I can't accept their gift because it's too big and that sort of thing. But then, we as a field have also sort of stepped back from the fact that no gifts, whereas every other related service field says a small token, a food item. Some of those things are perhaps more acceptable because if there's a social element to what we do and families, clients want to do nice things for us. So we weren't being good conversation partners by just being, nope, no gifts. I can't do that. It's unethical. It also makes us sound really snobby to other fields. But that was a small tangent. The point being, we have a lot of shared meaning in this context of we're usually trying to do what's best for our clients as well as what's best for our field and our organization. So that should hopefully help 9 times out of 10.
So we've got our pool of mutual our pool of mutual purpose. Maybe not, but again, we're assuming it, and we mostly, like Alan, you're saying, we're mostly going to be fortunate in that will be the case in our field. So we got to do some prep. We're going to choose your topic. So this chapter is only in the 3rd edition. So this is some of the new stuff. So chapter 3, choose your topic. We got a new chapter. We got a new acronym. What does it all mean?
Yeah, so one thing I like about this chapter too is when you're having a conversation, right, you're going to choose what you're going to go in for, right? But that may change depending on the response of the person. And I loved that part of this, right? Like you say, I really want to talk about how you never clean the living room, right? And then, or why you never clean up your desk after your session. And then the therapist says something very surprising that then means maybe they don't trust you or they're feeling defensive. And this is the time where you need to be choosing your topic. You don't always keep digging and digging about the desk cleaning. If they say something that doesn't mean that they suggest that they don't trust you or that, they're not feeling comfortable, you need to stop and address that. So that's something that you're looking at is what conversation should you be having right now? And it might not be the conversation that you thought of going in. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really nice. And they had a lot of different like vignettes in here. Mm-hmm. That was helpful, right? And a lot of the times we'll know that we're in these hard conversations when it doesn't feel right? When you are getting defensive, the other person's getting defensive, when you don't feel great about the conversation, you're like, I'm not even sure they heard me, right? Or if you felt like you've had this conversation multiple times over and over and over again, that probably means that you had the wrong conversation, meaning you weren't listening, you weren't stepping back and hearing what the other person had to say and then shifting your focus. Right? And so in this chapter, they give you a lot of different ways that you can kind of figure out whether you're in the right conversation or not. And if you're in the wrong conversation, what can you do, right? So they said that there's 3 different levels that you might need to have, right? So the first one is content. I said that so wrong. Content, right? You're just looking at, if a problem comes up, you're just going to talk about what the problem is and then solve it. This is the easiest one, right? You're like, hey, you didn't provide reinforcement right there. And they're like, whoops, that's on me. And then they just fix it. That one's the content, right? So that one's pretty easy. It's just a content problem. You're just going to move on. But then what happens is after the 2nd or 3rd or 4th time that you provided supervision and there's reinforcement not being delivered, then that comes to that 2nd level where that is a pattern, right? So it's not that it's just happened once, it's just keeping coming up and over again, right? Maybe you've given feedback to that supervisee over and over and over again. So that's that 2nd level. You're going to have to directly address that, right? And figure out what conversation you're having. And then if it's not content, you see a pattern, and then it's probably up to think about how is this pattern affecting our relationship? So how is this affecting our supervisee and supervisor relationship? Are they going to start to avoid me? Have you ever done that with a supervisor? Totes, I have. Right? When I know that a supervisor was just giving me like feedback, I see them and I'm like, oh, I like cover my eyes and like duck into a bathroom until they go by. No, this has not happened to anybody. Just me.
Yeah,
I've
just you, Jackie.
Amazing supervisors.
The rest of us have always had good supervisors, been good supervisors. I don't know what you're talking about there.
I had that happen in a college class once where I literally walked out of the room and went to the bathroom until the class was over. So you're not the only person who's experienced that.
Oh, yeah, I have. I just there was just a pattern. We weren't on the right page here. We were just kind of hashing it out over, and it's just horribly aversive for me. And so then I tended to avoid my supervisor, which wasn't great for our relationship, right? And so that, Rob, is the CPR. Content, pattern, relationship. Right?
This, I again, this was not in the second edition, and in very quickly kind of trying to catch up on the parts that were new to the third edition. It seemed a little extraneous to me, but I think it gets covered in a lot of the other sections. But everyone is disagreeing. No, I didn't see how it fit. But again, I came to this one a little later in terms of the edition I had when I was doing my notes. So
I think the point that we're probably going to bring up soon about how every conversation needs to be grounded in safety between the conversational partners, like that was the biggest take home for me. And this seems like it kind of fits in with that, right? So if you can't just have a conversation about content if your relationship isn't good with the person.
So it's a priming the pump chapter. I think I'm in looking at some of the. It's more about like thinking overall about the conversation.
I think for us as behavior analysts, it's the same type of thing that's been coming up in a lot of the conversations we've been having, which is we can't only be looking at the behavior that's occurring at present without considering the overall, current setting events, current motivating operations, and then past reinforcement or punishment history between the two parties. So there's so much contextual considerations that should be had when we're thinking about current behavior and why it is or isn't changing. So for me, this is kind of getting at that, right? Like if you can just have a real simple content conversation, then all of the other stuff is well. But if you can't, then it means that you need to be going back and analyzing further what some of those potentially or contextual variables that are potentially have gone wrong.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they bring that up. Oh, go ahead, Alan.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, this chapter is really helpful in, like, if you want to talk like a behaviorist and that they give you 3 discriminative stimuli, your emotions escalate, you walk away skeptical, you feel like you're having deja vu dialogue, and then they give you a protocol, see the content pattern relationship, a way to sort of reflect on and address that issue. So I felt like this was a very useful chapter potentially for people who need to learn this method, or if you were trying to sort of take the lesson and run with it for supervision practice.
Right. And, with our supervision practice in the curriculum, the supervision BACB curriculum, the version 2, there is a reflection component, right? To think about how well have I done at supervision. And I think this is the key, right? I had a hard conversation. How am I feeling about this conversation? Am I these three things? If I am, okay, let's look. Let's go back and look at the supervision content of the conversation, right? And say, okay, where am I missing stimulus control? Where is there faulty stimulus control in one of these things? Is it I'm not delivering the content clear enough? Are my instructions not specific enough? Am I not providing salient cues in the environment? If yes, then you move to the pattern. Okay, what's happening here? And then you look similarly. You're like, okay, are is my feedback salient enough? Like, am I being clear with my feedback, right? So then if you're like, yes, then you look at the relationship. Okay, have I done anything to strengthen the relationship so that my feedback is more salient, right? And so I think looking through that, and then they bring up, right, be aware when someone tries to change the conversation, right? So if they're changing the conversation, it's something to think about. Do you need to have this conversation, or are they trying to divert, right? Is it, again, faulty stimulus control, or are they trying to avoid it? So, but you need to be listening. I think that's the biggest thing for us as behavior analysts, because we're not great, I don't think, overall at listening. And then being able to pick up the relevant cues in the environment that are going to bring it back, right? And if they do change topic and it is something they're like, oh, this is actually more important, our relationship's at stake. I like their topic of saying, oh, I hear you. We're going to talk about this conversation, the one I wanted to have tomorrow. But right now we're going to talk about this relationship issue. They call it placing a bookmark on the conversation. So I like that. So recognizing that there was a conversation that you were going to have. You still need to have it. But at this very present moment, something more important's coming up. And then, like your staff may feel more valued, right? They might feel more supported, more heard, right? Which will then hopefully leak down into other areas.
Yeah, Jackie, just like they say that perfectly in the book. You've summed it up. Clarity is crucial, but so is flexibility. Remember, this isn't a monologue. It should be a dialogue. Other people are involved in their wants and needs. So we're kind of saying that if someone needs to escape, you should let them escape, because they're giving you an opportunity to maintain the relationship in a way that is vital.
Yeah.
That if you hammer home your point, because they need to learn, which is a phrase you'll hear me say with annoyance, then you're not succeeding as a supervisor.
So we find ourselves either in a crucial conversation that it needs to happen and that our audience is ready to have happen, or that's the most relevant component of the current interaction, or we find that we need to change the topic and might be in a different crucial conversation that we weren't exactly planning to be in, but we have to have regardless in order to maintain our relationship or to address a pattern. So I guess that would bring us into our next chapter. Starts with heart, which makes me think of, did anyone else think of Captain Planet and the Planeteers with that chapter, or is it just me?
Just you.
Okay, just me. There was a guy.
Heart is the special element that you need.
Is the element to make Captain Planet.
Yeah, exactly.
You need it with the other elements, right?
I know.
Okay, thank you, Diana. Everyone's staring at me like I just made that up.
We gotta take pollution down to 0.
All right. So start with heart is a big principle of having a dialogue. And the key component of this chapter really, I thought, had to do with the idea of you control you. I mean, in the sense of you can pay attention to stimuli, you can respond to those stimuli. That's it. You're not going to be able to make anyone do what you want as a context of dialogue, nor would you want to, because it would defeat the purpose of dialogue. And we have to remember that and keep coming back to some sort of a goal. That's the heart, a motive. Why am I having this conversation? Why am I in this conversation? And no matter what happens, that's the focus. Because what will often happen in crucial conversations when you're not prepared for them, or you don't go back to your motive, is they will turn into winning. They'll turn into, I have to win. I have to save face. Someone is saying something that made me upset. I have to make it clear to them that they are wrong. I have to debunk their points, which is not going to necessarily, well, actually, in no way would it ever result in reaching your motive of, I'm trying to get a schedule that works for everybody, or I'm trying to bring up tardiness, or I'm trying to share a really sensitive piece of feedback with the supervisee. You have to focus on that as your goal, is to benefit. I'm trying to help everyone with this. I'm trying to reach a goal for my team, rather than get sidetracked with when someone says, yeah, but you always are late and have a terrible schedule. Well, I have a different schedule. You can't get off track there.
We'll say lessons to be learned by Redditors everywhere.
So they suggest some steps to do are to, and again, these feel very much like, kind of the diffusion techniques, like step away from your interaction, focus on your reflective questions, sort of you're getting at what's happening in the moment. But I like these questions. They're ones that certainly when we talk about psychological flexibility, I think some of them are very good ones to sort of get out of kind of repeating the same stories over and over again. So what do I really want for myself? What do I really want for others? What do I really want for the relationship? So again, getting back to some of those questions to focus on that heart.
It's like, how do I walk into this conversation without being a total jerk?
Mm-hmm. Which may be, subsection 2 of your goal of the schedule, or of the giving the feedback. That should always be part of it. Asterisk, put it, underneath, always a component of your heart or your goals. And then coming back to it. And again, that seems really easy. to say, like, would you come back to your idea? But I think coming back to those questions and continually pausing and giving yourself time to ask those reflective questions is a really nice way to kind of get back to what is the purpose of this dialogue I'm about to have and going to have. So again, if you're jumping into a conversation you know is going to be uncomfortable and you haven't decided what your motive is or what the motive is, not your motive, but the motive is, you really need to step back, because it's going to be very hard if you're kind of not clear what you want out of this conversation, what you're hoping will be gained out of this conversation, if you don't have that set. Because the first time someone says something nasty to you, you're probably going to fall into old patterns of taking that fool's choice of like, well, now I've got to tell them how wrong they are so they all understand, my authority as the supervisor, as the person in charge. Or I'm just going to sit here and take it. I clearly didn't do a good job, but they're still wrong, and we haven't solved any problems, and I'm just mad at everyone for dumping on me for the past 10 minutes in this conversation. It's a lot of accepting the complexity of situations that lead to crucial conversations, too. Again, a lot of this book felt like some improv questions. You're not gonna and no, but you're gonna yes and come back to some of those motives.
I've
again
used
and
that
again.
Example, or I don't know, analogy, I guess, for a long time. So I was really pleased to see that they also used it.
Did you invent that? You invented improv?
I thought I had invented using the yes and, but I guess I didn't. I still think it's a really good one, right?
Yes and is good. Always yes and. Whether in your sketch comedy team or in your crucial conversations, you want a yes and.
Yeah, particularly when you're trying to work towards, what was it called? The higher goal? The one ring? Top of the triangle.
Your higher middle goal.
Yeah. Not Middle Earth, but whatever it's like. If you're trying to work to something together, right? There's almost never a time where you need to have a hard no, particularly as a supervisor, because the goal isn't that you're just exerting your control over someone else who you already are in a position of power over. It's that you are all reaching the conclusion together. And you don't have the best idea just because you're in charge, right? Someone else likely has a better idea than you, honestly. And you're going to get a much more productive relationship and ultimate goal for whatever your organization is if you're working together. So, and you're not going to achieve that unless you yes and.
Unless your motive was to make everyone realize how much smarter you were than them. In which case, you're not having a crucial conversation.
There is the presumption going into this that you as a supervisor have the right goals in mind.
Yes, which is hopefully we're going to come up with a solution, or we're going to solve a problem together.
Yeah.
So have your motive, helps you stay away from that fool's choice again. Focus on the and kind of statements. You're not trying to make the answer appear. You're trying to work to develop an answer with the people you're having a conversation with. And it can be hard. And again, I think every chapter does try to build on, it is hard to do these things, and here's another trick, or here's another tool that sort of leads to a coherent whole as to how you can do this. Though the authors will also, like we've already talked about, the authors admitting you don't have to necessarily do every single step in this book to have a good crucial conversation. You could just pick up, there are a few you need to be aware of. But I think awareness really does come down to one of like the big tricks of the book, of being aware of your motive. And then in the next chapter, being aware of the stories that you're telling. So that leads us to the last chapter in part 1, and that'll be the last one we discuss on this episode. If you're listening to the 2-part version, which is mastering my story. And that's not watching all the soap operas, folks. That's mastering the understanding of what it is you are telling yourself when you are creating these narratives. And this one gets a little more, mind-filey in terms of like getting in your head and what's the story you're telling. They even do this like sort of pseudoscience description of the idea of like almost like an intertrial interval of stimulus to action, in which story is some sort of like magic sauce that like appeared in your brain without appearing, which I didn't quite understand where they were going with that. But they were really trying to really just impact the point of how many of our emotions and how a lot of our private events are going to be based in just statements, private, our own thoughts and statements as to what's happening. And we're going to come to conclusions that are not necessarily based in evidence. They're going to be based on what they call these stories. So again, assumptions, learning history, whatever you want whatever you want to call them. That idea that when other individuals are doing something in our crucial conversation that we don't agree with, we are going to get emotional and engage in emotional behavior. We're going to go back on assumptions about that individual. We're going to engage in that telling stories or private verbal behavior. And then we're going to respond to our private behavior as if it is fact, which usually means we're going to do things that are potentially harmful, or silence or violence are the terms they come to later in the book. We're either going to just pull back or we're going to go on the attack. And again, based on information that is likely false, but is not necessarily based on observable, any sort of observable data. It's just emotional behavior.
Well, and it just makes me think of like self as context and cognitive diffusion from the ACT model. Like that's really what these stories are. Like the story we tell ourselves about what is going on is going to cause us to continue feeling and potentially acting in certain ways. And if you're find yourself acting like a jerk, either through what they call silence or violence, then you need to diffuse yourself from the situation. You need to reframe your story so that you can come out of that mindset.
There's a good example I think Pat Fryman does with this, where it's you're sitting in traffic and you're behind a lady, or you're behind somebody, I should say. You don't know who it is, and the light turns green and they just sit there. And at first you're like, oh, they must be on their phone, or they must be just paying attention to something else. They missed the light. The light turns red. You're kind of annoyed, but you're like, everyone screws up. Then it turns green again. Person's still not moving. You start honking. Your story changes to, this person must be an idiot. This person must not respect my time. This person must just be a horrible monster. And the light turns red, and you're getting really mad. You're engaging in emotional behavior. You're honking that horn. You're flipping the person off. And then it turns green again. The person's still not moving. And you get out of the car. You go up to the window, and you're banging on the window. And the person rolls down the window, and it's a young mother with a baby in the back and says, help, help, my baby's not breathing. I love that story, not because of the tragic nature of it, but because it really captures, I think, that process we go through of someone is doing something. They must be doing it because they're incompetent. They must be doing it because they're stupid. They must be doing it because they hate me. And it becomes this elaborate sort of self-talk about how what is going on is personal. It is meant to cause emotional responding. And at the end of the day, you have no idea. To some extent, but you have a limited understanding of, the variables behind some individual's behavior, unless you have done a very thorough analysis, which again, you probably haven't necessarily done when thrust into a crucial conversation. So what are the contexts that are going on here? The why, the how, the what, and focusing on how do we, I like that. I like the kind of reference to that idea of, self as context and that diffusion. We need to sort of recognize that action, we're usually in a crucial conversation, we're at that phase where we're observing behavior, but we don't necessarily have the antecedent. There might be contexts and events that we are not privy to, that we do not know, and we need to be aware of that and coming back to that. And to some extent, just remembering, and again, they bring this up in that the last chapter of the book, just sort of remembering, hey, I wonder why I'm feeling this way. Hey, I wonder if what I'm thinking isn't what's actually happening. Hey, rather than telling a story of, well, they're disagreeing with me because they want to get a promotion and they're a bad person. Hey, what do I actually see? They just said they don't know if that's the best idea. Oh, okay. And just going through those sort of steps of challenging yourself, challenging that feeling, questioning it, questioning the story. My feeling is real. I am annoyed. I am angry. I am impatient. But the reason isn't clear at this point in the conversation. And what are the facts that you have in front of you? And when you actually think about the facts and when you try to label the facts to yourself, also being reflexive of how am I phrasing these facts? They say look for hot terms that are implications or just other ways to say emotional, kind of to label emotions that aren't actually based on observable behavior necessarily. We've got 3 patterns they bring up. So again, we're not going to go into super detail about all of them, but I think these are common ones. The idea of I'm the victim in this story. Therefore, I have to act in a way because somebody is trying to hurt me. That person, the villain story. The other person I'm having a conversation with is the bad guy. I'm the good guy. And I have to act no matter how bad the outcome because I deserve to, because they're doing bad things that hurt me. Potentially, if it's an aversive, if possibly someone you have an aversive relationship with. And the helpless story. This is a terrible idea, but there's nothing I can do. So when I passive aggressively, drop things in their trash or refuse to take on steps in the final process, it's because I was harmed in such a way. And these kind of tend to be common patterns. And I think we can all think of an example. We don't have to say them now, but an example where we were a victim, or we decided someone was the villain, or we decided we were totally helpless to change the situation. So just recognizing that we don't have all the facts, reflecting on what is it that we see, what is it that we hear, might do a lot to sort of change it. And just the idea that, hey, we might be telling a story. And they're very honest, just saying, hey, I wonder if I'm just telling a story. In some cases, that might sort of, snap you. It's like the magic spell. It just sort of snaps you out of the pattern of behavior you've engaged in the past and allows you to recognize that there are other perspectives and to get back to that heart, to get back to that mutual purpose.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
Hey, Patreon listeners, thanks so much for supporting the podcast and getting the full Crucial Conversations Book Club episode right now sent to your podcatcher of choice. Just like normal, we're going to have 2 code words hidden in the episode. I'm going to give you the first one in just a moment. And then when you go to the post on our Patreon page for this episode, you will have a secret bonus discount code. So not exactly a code word, but a code that you can put in. So when you purchase your CEs, you will get no charge. It's totally as a bonus for being a Patreon subscriber. So again, thank you very much. You still need to put in the 2 code words though, and here is the first one. It is Icy. ICEE. It's the drink. It's like a Slurpee, but if it doesn't get sold at 7-Eleven, they call it an Icy. It's a yummy, yummy drink. It's a frozen drink. An Icy. Doesn't need to be capitalized. Totally fine. All lowercase. All right. Sorry for jumping in. Let's get back to our conversation. All right. So we've got the stage set. We know we're prepared to have our crucial conversations. We are prepared to sort of do our own reflection. Now it's time for some action. We're going to talk about part 2, how to open your mouth, which I didn't love as the title of a part. It seemed a little, condescending. But in any case, that brings us to our next chapter, Learn to Look. And again, if you're at the end of the book, you wanted to skip ahead to see how it ends. This is one of the second kind of big take-homes, this Learn to Look chapter. I think this is kind of one of their big take-homes and relates a lot to our, or the author's idea of mastering your own story or recognizing your own story.
I liked how it's like opening your mouth, because that's what you're going to start doing. So because like right when you're gonna, I know that I'm like being such a jerk to you today, but I don't mean to. But
well, that's the story I'm telling myself right now, Jaggy's a jerk. She's trying to make me look bad to the podcast audience.
I'm not though. if that's your opinion, right? And this is my opinion, that I like this part because when you have a conversation, the moment that you start speaking is the moment that things can go horribly wrong or horribly right. I could say one word and I could make the entire conversation unsafe, right? And so that's why I like that part. I mean, yeah, it's kind of cheesy, right? Because I, again, don't like the tone and the style. But I get where they're coming from because I could say one thing and then I could totally screw up the entire conversation right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Or not. I go, and then screw it up.
And I think that the previous chapter and this chapter both, they don't really say it, but we always hear about watch your always and your nevers.
Mm.
Like, this is...
That is me.
Yeah, like that is a very important thing, both for your private your personal private conversations, as well as your supervision conversations, and how like you have to watch like that in the CPR a way that is it really a pattern, or are you just aggravated and saying always and never? Like, do they always do it? And even if they do you want to have that come out of your mouth and completely put them on the defensive about this behavior? So
this is me in a nutshell. I am the always and never girl when I get into a fight with someone or I'm getting into an argument. That is the first place I go to, like, you always do this. And so it has not worked well for me. And I haven't gotten into I don't do it at work because I don't get in that sort of fight at work, right? But in my personal life, I do. And I haven't gotten into a fight recently, luckily for me. But when I do, and I'm starting to have these types of conversations, I am going to be very careful about my always and nevers because it's very rarely the case.
Mm-hmm. So this chapter is a lot about, like we're saying, sort of just looking for cues that signal safety in a conversation. Because as much as it is a tough conversation, that doesn't mean it needs to be an unsafe conversation. Because if the other parties feel unsafe, they're not going to engage in the crucial conversation. It no longer meets the criteria really for a meaningful crucial conversation. So it really has a lot to do with sort of paying attention to those nonverbal cues or potentially verbal cues that are signaling that somebody is upset, somebody feels uncomfortable. They could be, it could look like they're going to throw up. They could be raising their voice or pointing their finger. And it just showing these signs of what they call fearfulness. And this leads to the idea that a lot of times in our conversations, we are going to, if we set up unsafe situations or we don't attend to unsafe situations, we're leading our conversation partners to respond and then potentially ourselves to respond with, and we've said this term a couple times, but it's time to define it, silence or violence, which those are good. I think that they rhyme. They really get across, I think, the point of what they're looking for. So I'm going to give you the definitions from the book. So when we're talking about a silent response, it's the act of an individual, so any act to purposefully withhold information from the pool of meaning. So it's some sort of an avoidance technique. That could be, I'm only selectively showing my true opinion, I'm being sarcastic, I'm sugarcoating my responses. Could be actual avoidance, I'm physically I'm verbally changing the topic. Or it could be actually physically withdrawing. I'm just going to leave. I won't be a part of this conversation. And then the violence being any verbal strategy that attempts to convince, control, or compel others to your point of view. So those were quotes. I have the page numbers, but they're in the second edition. So you may be out of luck if you try to find them in the third edition, exactly the right page. But that's when your goal is sort of to win. My pool is the pool of meaning. So you start trying to coerce others by forcing your views. You dominate a conversation. You're cutting people off. You're speaking in absolutes. Alan, the always and never that you brought up would be good examples of that. You're labeling people to try to sort of dismiss them, but this could be a very easy place where you are engaging in, racist. I was going to say subtly racist, but even overtly kind of racist or stereotyped thinking to try to sort of cow the other individual, or just flat out attacking, threatening people, going even beyond that, actually threatening people or belittling other individuals. And they give you a little test that you can actually take, some true false questions to find your style under stress. So not only knowing that you could set up a stage for people to be silent or violent to you, but when you're in a crucial conversation where someone's not paying attention to your signs of safety, how might you respond? Did anyone take the test to see what their style was under stress?
I did not need to take it.
I did.
What were you, Jackie?
Diana's avoidant.
Yeah, I didn't need to do that test.
Okay. Jackie, what'd you come out as?
I came out as controlling, not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm violence and attacking, not surprising.
Well, I think if people just know you from the show, they're like, Jackie, she's so fun, she's so funny. But I think people who know you and love you very much would say, oh no, Jackie's going to be the violence of the two of these. No way.
Oh yeah, 100%. Right? No, it's so true. I was like, yep, oh yeah. I looked at it before I took the test, and I guessed that I would be controlling and attacking. And then I was right when I took the test.
I was surprised for someone who spends a lot of time talking into a microphone. I was actually more of the silence. My responses tend to be a little more silence than violence for stressful situations.
No, Rob, like, I mean, you and I we have our differences, but you and I are definitely maskers, like sugarcoating it and using sarcasm and probably avoiding because it's hard to withdraw. It really is. But I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's definitely where I fall.
It's usually we talk about how all the things we have in common now, and we usually come to, we're such silent responders of stress. You know, it's our common.
I like, Rob, that you were like, yeah, that's totally Jackie.
I know you so well, Jackie. How many years now? Long time.
I know.
I
love it.
It's only as I've come to know Jackie this summer through socializing with her that I've realized that that's the case. Not because she's done it to me, but because she's been talking about herself. We were talking about personality traits, and one of the things we talked about, she was like, "Oh no, that's definitely me." And I'm like, "Really? That's who you like? You're like that? Okay, I guess I can see it."
Yeah.
So, and if you want to get where they have it's 31, 32 questions that get into not just are you silence or violence as your stress type in these crucial conversations, but they break it down by chapter too. So if you want to get into the nitty gritty, again, how reliable a test is this? We don't know. But if you want to sort of look at what are the chapters that I need to focus on. So if you're like, I listen to the podcast and I want to read the book, but I only have time for one chapter. Well, you take this test in chapter 6 of the 3rd edition, and you will know which chapter you should read first.
Like a Cosmo quiz.
Yeah.
Silence or violence.
So one thing I was a little bit sad about is that this happened in this chapter. I would have really liked to see it at the end as like a summary.
Oh, yeah, the test itself, yeah.
Yeah, I would have loved to see figure 6.1, which is like the what are you in this chapter, but then 6.2 your dialogue skills score at the end, because then it's like, oh, you've read this book. Here are the places that you really should go back and like focus on if you just have to reread something again. That's kind of, I was a little bit disappointed when I looked at, I was like, where's the rest of the questions? And I turned the next page and I was like,
Yeah, and they're on chapters you haven't read all the chapters yet.
Yeah.
So the context might be missed. Yeah, maybe they could have split it into the style under stress versus the actual dialogue skills as individual things.
That's how I had seen it. But
I do think that this is helpful, even if you maybe already sort of intuited your own style going into the quiz, to read through the quiz so you can see, because they're basically giving you like little operational definitions, right, of different ways that people might be reacting under these stressful conversations. So there might be some in there that you don't recognize in yourself, but seeing them written down could assist you in recognizing if someone else is starting to respond in that way, right? So as behavior analysts, they should be like right up our alley, right? If we are observing how the other person is responding, potentially in really subtle ways. It could be small shifts in like facial, what are those called?
Cues?
Facial, I don't know. Expressions, facial expressions, or body posturing, or the ways in which they're responding, even if they're still saying the same thing, but they're not saying it in the same way, right? Those subtle changes in response could be really big indicators to us that something's not right in this conversation and that the conversation partner does not feel safe in the conversation, and we need to re-rudder the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Not a call.
It's a good nautical term.
And I felt that it was unfortunate because they don't really address this, that if you have somebody who is perhaps neurodivergent of some form or another, I'm just going to say in my experience, part of the reason that I'm a masker and avoider and withdrawer, and that it is a history of having a lot of people who were violent and how that they had these crucial conversations with me, a lot of insensitivity. And so if you do have someone that you're supervising who is identified strongly with the withdrawing, avoiding, and masking, one thing that they don't talk about in this book is you should probably be aware that they may have other issues, other history, learner history at play, and this may be difficult. And you even pointing out the fact that, well, you're just masking, you need to stop doing that. That's not a good way to have a crucial conversation. It's probably not helpful. In fact, it's probably just going to make them not want to be your supervisee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I just felt it was kind of a missing portion of this section, that violent communicators, as it were, probably really cause a lot of silent communicators in this context. And that...
I 100% agree with you, Ellen. Since I am a violent communicator, I used to take silence as compliance. Like, oh yeah, they agree with me now because they're not talking, right? And so this book really helped me kind of relook at those types of things.
They said, sounds good, and they ran away. And you said, man, they're just so excited to do what I said.
Did it, they right?
If I'm silent, that usually means I do not agree with you.
Yeah. And I think it was really that phrase masking. At first I was like, well, I feel like they've appropriated this term that has a specific meaning. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, no, like in this context, it really is the same thing. And that I'm not contributing to the crucial conversation because I'm not revealing truths about how I feel or how I want to respond. They don't flesh it out very well, but so you could maybe miss that because not everyone who masks does it through sarcasm, sugarcoating, or couching it in other terms. But again, if you in that framework of withholding information from the pool of meeting, and then quite frankly, people get to do it if they want to. Like it may be a barrier to how they communicate, and you should help them find ways to get around it, which may take more work than what this book lets you do. But that really struck me as like, this is important, but there's a big missing piece of like the silence has context and learner history behind it.
Yeah. And some of it too might be, Alan, I think I'm hearing you in terms of I mostly read this book in terms of how would I have a good crucial conversation? How would I model crucial conversation? But I didn't spend a ton of time thinking about how would I go back and maybe try to teach or analyze crucial conversations as much. Like maybe that would be kind of a nice additional section or again, something to kind of look at in terms of, the supervisor supervisee role. Like there might be a context where you do talk about, hey, let's talk like just kind of like we've been doing. Let's talk about your stress under style. What might that mean? Which of these steps do you think might help you? Like make it a reflective activity to do with a supervisee. That might be a piece that, that could make that a little more coherent or cohesive. Perhaps I don't know if we necessarily get everything, but might give us some extra pieces that we could use to sort of improve the skill without just being in a conversation and then doing a feedback or doing a reflection after a crucial conversation. And
to say in the next chapter, they talk about, safety involves mutual purpose and mutual respect. So like they do address it in a roundabout way. Yeah. Like, but they don't do it quite as head on as I would have liked.
Well, let's talk about that chapter. So you've recognized safety is out the window. So what do? Well, go on to the next chapter. We're not going to tell you yet. You have to go to the next chapter to learn how to make it safe. Now, they talk about, of all their observations, most of the time when people recognize that they might not be making it safe, they find a lot of people just naturally, when they pay close attention to that, tend to make it a little safer. However, I think it's best to assume that when we're not making things safe, there are some steps that we should be taking. Just assuming, I have to make sure I make it safe doesn't necessarily mean you have made it safe. But you might get lucky in terms of paying close attention. And the authors tell you this, that if you pay attention to safety as something you care about, odds are you might engage in some of these making it safe behaviors pretty naturally without a lot of additional like practice and training. But hey, you should always practice and train on new skills, regardless of whether you might get lucky and not have to. And again, like you said, Alan, that first condition of safety is having a mutual purpose. So making it clear to your partners, that the goal of the conversation is to reach a common outcome that everyone is happy with, that everyone has built on, in that the kind of that mutual pool. That you care about the goals, they care about the goals, and that there are some shared value involved. But again, if you're seeing signs of unsafety or unsafe or safety being removed from the conversation, the question you want to ask yourself is, am I saying the words, but my partner doesn't trust my motives here? Part of that might be asking yourself, is there a mutuality in my purpose? Again, we're going to go back to Carnegie in terms of the idea of, if it doesn't work for both of you, this mutual purpose, if you ask yourself and say, what I am trying to do is get my way, that's really my goal here, there will never be a mutual purpose. You cannot create safety in your crucial conversation, and you're going to need to exit it and kind of come back to it, or you're going to need to find a mutual purpose within the conversation. But ideally, you already have one, and you can kind of come back to it. Again, you go back to heart, you go back to your main motive, and you can sort of focus on that. You can make sure that you are showing respect for the individual, even if you don't agree with them, but that you are kind of honoring their basic humanity, that you are here to work on something to reach a mutual purpose together. And that hopefully the thing that's being disagreed on is the strategy. How will you reach the purpose? Not that there is a purpose that you both care about. And then they give some steps.
You're saying all that stuff out loud. It's not just like,
yes,
I'm thinking it in my head about what the mutual purpose is, but I'm actually stating it to my conversation partner.
Yes. Ideally, that helps everything, recreates a sense of safety. And if you're noticing the person, they're putting their arms down, they're breathing again, they're starting to talk to you. Okay, great. You probably recreated a safe environment. If they haven't, some other suggestions they give are you could decide whether you need to apologize, engage in contrast, or the mutual purpose doesn't exist and you've now got to create or rebuild a mutual purpose for the rest of the conversation. Were there any of these three that jumped out at any of you as like, yes, that's the one that I've been trying to work on, or that's the one that's the most valuable, I think, to me as a practitioner, as a learner?
Are we looking at the crib analogy? Acronym?
No, not crib yet. Or was crib one that jumped out at you? Or did it jump out at you in that you're tired of acronyms and you didn't want to learn a new one? Crib had to do with when you're creating mutual purpose. That is a component of these. So this is an acronym within a list. I'm getting a look.
Oh,
I don't think Crucial Conversations discussion has created safety.
I'm thinking I liked the one I liked use contrasting.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that seems to be really helpful. That's something that you could practice every single day. And what that is clarifying it, like saying what you think they think, and then clarifying it to what you actually think. Right? They say, I'd like to talk to you about something that's worrying me, and I'm honestly not sure how to handle this conversation. My fear is that I'll draw down on our relationship, and that's not my intent. You see the contrasting? It's the opposite. My goal is bringing this up to strengthen our relationship. So contrasting, I think, would be really helpful because you are demonstrating that you see what they're going through, or that you've listened to what they're saying, but then you're saying, okay, that's actually not what I meant, so I'm going to clarify my intention. Yeah. And then I also liked the committing to creating and recreating that mutual purpose. Because I think a lot of the times, if I'm going to have a crucial conversation or something that's going to be challenging, I have what I want my end goal to be, right, and how I want the conversation to go. But I rarely talk to my supervisees about what they want out of this conversation. So I think
Yeah.
starting there would be really, I think it would be a nice way, and maybe awkward initially for supervisees, right? Because it's not typically how we have those types of meetings, but like, what do you want to get out of this meeting today? Here's what I want to talk about. How do you think we should get there? And I think that would be a nice way to bring, a conversation in.
With the idea of creating mutual purpose, that one was my least favorite, not so much because I didn't like it or agree with it, but because it felt like it did not get as much discussion time in the book as I think it would need to do it very well. Like, they have this great example of creating mutual purpose of a crucial conversation between two spouses. One is going to get a promotion, but they have to move across the country, and the other one is not happy with it, but knows that there won't be a job if they don't take that job. And they kind of exemplify what they mean by, sort of the discussion of that. The acronym they give is CRIB. So like you said, Jackie, starts with committing a sequel mutual purpose, recognizing there's a purpose behind the steps of the strategy that's going on. If you can't do that, you have to invent a mutual purpose and brainstorm new strategies. And I felt like that inventing a mutual purpose and brainstorm new strategies, like that example of when they shared that example, it's like, man, what would this couple do? Well, they're going to get a divorce. This is going to be terrible. There's no way they can. And they sort of got into, but the values, they talked about their values, and their values were having community jobs. So maybe the problem isn't how do I work this job across the country and still see my family, but it's I should switch to a job that allows me to work in the community. And I was like, wow, that is a great solution. I never in a million years would have thought of it. And if I were asked to be in a conversation of this level of cruciality, where I had to invent a new purpose, I think I would have failed. Or I think I would have gone into silence and like, I guess you're just going to have to move across the country, and I'll only see you once a month, and I'll take care of the household by myself and our 7 rambunctious children, and it's okay. But it's
that
not
sounds super passive aggressive, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's what I would do. I wouldn't have done the I and the B. I wouldn't have been like, well, let's talk about our values. We love the community. So I really wanted more in that section, because I feel like if I got to a crucial conversation like that, maybe it's rare enough that they didn't expect most of the audience to need to, but I didn't feel like I had the wherewithal. Whereas apologies and contrasting, here's my don't statement and my do statement. I'm sorry, here's why, and here's how I'm going to change it. Like those, yeah, I get that. I can do those too.
Or the example about the couple that one of them wanted to go out for their date night and one of them wanted to stay home, right? But they realized that their ultimate value was just that they could spend time together. And then they just compromised and did it with the wife.
I think there might have been some silence in that conversation.
Jacob. I liked contrasting too. I feel like that is a really useful skill, and it's not something that you can automatically just do, right? You have to kind of practice what that sounds like, and so that you can do it in a way that's genuine and really is taking into consideration how the other person might be thinking. You got to do some perspective taking in order to kind of get that right. But it's a really useful skill in these crucial conversations.
Yeah.
Like, I'd like to talk to you about your car's extended warranty. You might think that I'm just approaching you to try to get more money from you, but actually, I am really worried about you and your family's safety.
Well, I don't have a relationship with you, car salesman, so all this ain't gonna work.
I was like, Diana, I thought you weren't going to get into this today.
Go back to chapter. Go back to chapter 3, car salesman. You got a ways to go.
All right, chapter 8.
So we've got safety. We're recreated safety. The next couple chapters get kind of back into the idea of the stories of how do you, and I did kind of like this format of the book. Okay, so now you've created a safe environment. You've made it clear there's a mutual purpose, or you've developed a mutual purpose. How do you still advocate for yourself, and add from your mutual pool in a meaningful way, where you're not just going back on your old kind of tricks and removing safety, or going to violence, or going to silence. So, how can you do that? And again, they reiterate, well, start with safety. Make sure you keep coming back to safety. Have I created safety while I'm advocating for myself? Am I still also maintaining safety? Have I started enough with heart that I have a clear motive that I can keep coming back to? And then they use the state. So when they say state your path, guess what? It's an acronym, folks. State. The acronym. You want to state your facts. And this is kind of a what skill. Don't talk about kind of your emotions behind, why you're going to do what you're going to do, but sort of focus on observably. These are the things that I am seeing. These are the things that are happening. These are the things that we want to focus on or we want to resolve. But start with facts. And again, presenting facts not in order to win a debate, but sharing facts just to get across the meaning. This is kind of where I'm coming from. This is sort of what it is that I would like us to be talking about. And ideally, you want to do this before the conversation. This is another one that comes before the conversation. So if you don't have the facts that you're going to want to come into when you advocate to add your meaning, try to get those facts ahead of time rather than trying to think of them in the middle of the conversation, because that's when you're probably going to focus on non-observables, emotional states. Now that you have your facts out, now you can share a story of your own. You can share a conclusion in a neutral and reasonable way. So instead of it being, and that's why you're the worst employee in the world, it can be, and I'd like to discuss this so we can come up with a solution related to your tardiness in completing your assessments, or having missed deadlines on these assessments. Again, as factual as possible. Again, you're going to want to keep that safety eye, but there's your T in state. Then you would ask for others' paths, because again, if the goal is really to expand that pool of meaning, you want to hear what the other person has to say. So this is where I'm coming from, but I'd like to hear other people's ideas. You then talk tentatively. So using phrases like, I was wondering why, or in my opinion, perhaps you were. Those are ones from the book. Again, that's meant to soften the message a bit and to make it clear that this is just the conclusion you're coming to and you're open to other interpretations. It is not the same as sounding wimpy, which would be things like, I know I'm wrong, but, or I'm calling me crazy, but I think you've been late. That's not the same thing. One is advocating for yourself. One is sort of kind of creating an environment where you're really just going to silence in your sort of passive aggressive kind of way, where the message is, what I'm saying doesn't matter because I'm the helpless victim. And when you don't recognize that's what I'm doing, I'm mad at you, and I'll talk behind your back. And then finally, encourage some testing. So you're going to end kind of all your advocacy with, am I missing anything? I'd love to hear what you think about that. Or do you think, does this capture anything? Or are there things that I didn't say? But again, that invitation. And again, this is where relationship might come into play, because if the person doesn't have a good relationship with you, they may see this as a trap of this person just wants me to affirm what they just said and then be silent. So if nobody says anything and you're noticing that it's safety, they even recommend it's your job to then also play devil's advocate with yourself. Because I was wondering, or I thought that maybe I'd be wrong because blank, blank, blank. Because again, that's one way you can kind of recreate safety while still advocating for yourself. And again, this only works effectively if your goal is to come up with a mutual purpose and to reach a mutual purpose. If you're just doing this to get your way, you could have just said, this is what I want and I demand it, and then stamp your foot or stamp your fist and see how far that gets you. Probably not very far, but I guess you could do it if your goal was really just to get what you wanted.
They talk about big, tough conversations, like telling your boss that they're micromanaging you in a way that's not quite so aggressive. But the next example they give about the person sort of not following an internal protocol, I think those are important conversations that we don't have, because thinking about PPE and the way that, so in my organization, if we're working with clients that aren't able to tolerate masks, we have extra PPE that we're supposed to wear, but it's cumbersome and it's very easy to forget about, to forget that you need to put it on, especially if you move clients. And I think sometimes we have issues with compliance in those kinds of circumstances, because it's like, oh, well, they're going to freak out and I don't want to make them feel bad. And it's a problem. No, you can just say, I've noticed the last 3 times that I've provided supervision, you haven't had on your goggles. I'd like to work on that for the safety of ourselves, our clients, and because it's good, an internal policy that we've all agreed is important to the organization, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But it's a hard conversation to have because it seems so petty, but it's really not. It's like an important safety issue.
Yeah. But and where's the mutual purpose? Is I know we all want to keep our clients healthy and avoid more pandemic. We're all tired of that, aren't we? Would be there you go. So hopefully you have the baseline there to engage in these kind of the state steps to kind of advocate for yourself. But then you might ask yourself, I'm just someone who I love rules and masks, and I'm demanding people wear them for my own personal safety.
Rob.
A bad situation.
So just to summarize what STATE stands for, because you did it kind of like the long version. It's share your facts, tell your story, ask for others' paths, talk tentatively, and encourage testing.
Mm-hmm.
STATE. They use this acronym a lot throughout the book.
Well, what's left of the book?
I guess what's left of the book. So I feel like this is an important acronym, and we had to rate the acronyms. I put this one near the top.
Yeah, though I don't think they consider this to be like the most important skill they discuss in this book, though I found it to be probably what I was most hoping for in the book, which is how do I get across what it is I'm trying to say in a way that doesn't lead to silence or violence.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that I could do that is helpful, but I think it was nice to have these steps as sort of a framework that I could follow to sort of do my best to present information in a way that is not going to come off as, end up as masking or turn into silence or turn into violence.
And that's sort of what's nice about the next two chapters is that it helps you, like, now you've done this, and the other person, especially if you're in a supervisor-supervisee relationship, you want to help them be able to do this as well. And they've maybe not gone into the amount of practice that you've had. And so it's a nice guide of like how to help this other person navigate a conversation and how you can respond and how you can help keep the conversation on task in like an empathetic and helpful way, rather than being like, that's not what we're talking about. You've gotten off task. No, it gives you some nice tools.
Yeah.
And this whole courtroom is off task.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next chapter, it feels like the mirror reflection of state your path. So now you state your path. Like, how do I make everyone state their? I want to help everyone. I had so much fun stating my path. I want you to state your path.
Oh, Rob, you'll be happy to know that mirror is one of the steps in the next acronym.
No, it's not.
We're going to help them. We're going to help them. Yeah, we're going to help them get amped up.
Yes, no, mirror is in the acronym. Yes. I was like, no, God, I see
acronym.
amp.
It's in.
Is there amp and mirror? And how many more acronyms do we got? This book's wrapping up.
No, it's in the next acronym.
Yeah.
Which is AMP.
And much like your power tie, you've got your power listening tools, AMP, ask, mirror, paraphrase, and prime, of which I think most of these are pretty commonly used terms. Prime was one I wasn't quite sure what they meant, but it really just comes down to, and if all else fails, make a guess. Like, I'm noticing you're doing this. Is it possible? Or I'm wondering if, and then you sort of tell them like, this is what I think you would say if you were stating your.
I'm wondering if you're taking those computer parts home in your backpack. That was an example in there.
I'm wondering if you're doing that, right? So you know that you're not supposed to bring those home, right? Right?
It seems like what's happening. Okay.
So yeah, that it's kind of so ideally they'll then state their path appropriately. If they do not, again, you can ask them. You can mirror statements. Certainly always paraphrase. That's good empathetic listening. That's a good skill in a lot of situations. And that priming one we came up with. And again, if everyone's agreeing and they're sharing, well, not even agreeing, but they're sharing more thoughts, safety's probably there. You're all on the right path. And you can focus more on, okay, well, now we're going to come up with a strategy that's important. And then the last chapter in this section, Retake Your Pen, really has to do with taking feedback, which that's new for the third edition. I came to those later, so I didn't give them as much time as the content in the second edition that we've talked about. But it really felt a little tacked on. Like, here's how to take feedback. I don't know, it's a good skill. Which there was nothing in there that was like, this is bad. I don't like this. Isn't how you take feedback. But it didn't. I didn't quite get how it gelled together. I don't know if I might have been missing something, but it did feel a little like someone wanted to hear about feedback, so here it is. We put it in the book.
I think what they needed to do was figure out, like how the end of the conversation happens. Because if you just didn't have these last 2 chapters, then you would just be like, we've had this conversation, right? Like someone else is going to give us feedback, but you haven't prepared us for what to do when it doesn't go exactly like we want, like in the rehearsal. If you guys have seen that HBO show, you should totally watch it.
Yes. That was a weird show.
I love it. I love it so much.
Did you finish it?
What?
Did you finish it? The first season? Oh, okay.
But right, so it's like how to deal with yourself, right? They've taught you how to like handle everyone else, but then this is all about you. This is your reflection chapter. And maybe that's a little harder to read too, right? Because the second edition didn't have that in there. Sorry, my contact is falling out. But I think this is the you chapter. Like, what do you do when you hear something that you don't like, or you hear something that you were surprised about, right? How do you receive it and then move forward?
Yeah, especially to be able to then make having the next crucial conversation easier because you've learned from it in the best way possible.
Right.
Oh, then in that, I don't know, maybe it should have fit into our last part, which is how to finish then. I guess it does reflect into the, your amp and you're getting everyone to state their paths. I did like how the second edition then went into the next chapter, the first part of how to finish, which is move to action. And we're not going to go into as much detail on that, but just the idea of, great, you had this conversation. Everyone's high-fived. They feel safe. They're so excited that they got to share their, explore their shared meaning and create a great pool and have the higher middle road. And y'all agreed on what comes next. But then don't forget, the chapter really has like a good, and then don't forget, write down what it is y'all agreed on, set some goals, set some times. And depending on your workplace, you might also need to decide, how will this decision be implemented? Because some crucial conversations are meant to get facts so that the boss can make the final decision. Some crucial conversations are meant to make everyone feel comfortable enough that, all right, as a group, we're going to now vote. And no matter what wins, everyone's happy with the options. Some crucial conversations are ones where we're not leaving until we come up with a consensus response. And then once we have that decision, regardless, okay, who's doing what, when will we check in, what are the timelines? So this chapter really just sort of, goes over, all right, what do you do now that you've had the conversation? What's the end point? Now that you have something decided, how do you then turn that into action? Which, I didn't even really think about until I got to that chapter. I was so into those, like the conversations and the examples they had. They're like, oh, and then you have to do something after the conversation is over.
I think that's such a great reminder.
It's like, oh, it's over. Well, no, we got to have a plan of action going forward.
Right? I did it. Woo!
I feel so safe. I do too. Great job, everybody.
Nothing has changed.
Nope, nothing changed.
I will say, I think that I have been fortunate in that I've had this modeled for me in places that I've worked where there are established forms if there is an issue that needs to have feedback, right? And part of that form at the end of it is, what are our next steps that each of the people need to take? And let's, lay it out and have it be, behaviorally based, not just like, why don't you be better? Like, clearly something that person's going to do and a date by which they need to do it by. And then when you're in that meeting, you go ahead and schedule the follow-up meeting to the feedback meeting.
Yeah.
And then in the follow-up meeting, you're going to check and see, did everyone do their follow-up steps?
Yeah.
So I've had that model for me, but I think that, if you haven't ever seen that, you might not think to have it laid out what's going to need to happen in the future, but it's so helpful. And it takes the onus off either party to be the one that's going to initiate the action because it's all set and no one has to remember on their own.
Who does what, by when, and how will follow-up occur are the ones they lay out in the book. And then they even tell you that don't worry if people miss their deadlines and don't do these things, because guess what? It just gives you another chance to practice a crucial conversation related to their not completing the goal on time. It's a cycle.
Life's a journey. There's just so much to learn. Just keep learning.
So don't forget that. That's a good chapter for that. But again, doesn't relate necessarily to conversations, but does relate to modeling decision making. And I did actually appreciate that the questions you want to ask yourself when it comes to making decisions. One of which was, I can't remember if this was just my notes or if it was actually in the book, but who cares? Which could be, who are the stakeholders that are most interested in a solution? It could also be, this is not a decision that impacts me enough to get out of bed. So whoever wants to make the decision, I stated my path. I'm good. Whatever. Just choose what you like. Would be one of those kind of questions about who's deciding.
They just have who with the advice that we really means not me. So we aren't going to do anything. You are going to do something and I am going to do something, and then we'll come back together.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so true that we means not me.
Yep. And then our final two chapters, which we're going to just go over incredibly quickly, would be Yeah, But, which is they just give you, if you were like, wow, I had this terrible thing happen. Great. Check the back of the book. They go over some examples of times that just seemed like there was no way out of the crucial conversation. They talked about the danger point of many of these conversations. One would be an example of, there was one I liked. It was not in the third edition. It was in the second edition of a situation where people were getting feedback, and they do the thing where they're like, yeah, but no one told me that. And not just the one time where it is, legitimately when we train people, maybe we did not specify, look at our BST model. We didn't specify exactly what needed to be done. But every time a date is missed, it's, well, I wasn't told that, or it wasn't specific enough. You didn't get to it too much. That becomes kind of a pattern, which I thought was a good example because it's one you could find yourself into. And then they talk about, okay, where's the danger? Where could things go really wrong? And then they come up with sort of a solution, in this case, focusing on patterns related to the behavior, and then how you could use your STATE acronym and STATE steps to get across the concern you have and to rebuild that mutual purpose of coming up with a resolution. Any in there before we move on that people like? I love that, and I have to say it, versus people could just check out the book if they're interested in some dire what ifs.
Yeah, I think the what ifs are nice in the book if you're going to be using it, like, as you go along and you're practicing conversations and you find yourself in a predicament. But I don't think they're necessarily important for us to review.
And then finally putting it all together, which, spoiler alert, we already talked about this throughout, which are, what are the two giant take-homes from the book if you forgot everything else? And it is, number one, learn to look. Keep asking, am I in dialogue or out of dialogue? Is this silence or violence? Acknowledge, even if I don't know what it is I should do, acknowledge that something's not going well and I want to somehow change the tone of the conversation. And then number two, make it safe. Recognize that it is important to allow for safety and to create safety when you are having a dialogue. And then even if you forget the exact steps of how would you create something safe, just show interest, that you care about the person's responses to questions, and that if things are going really bad, you may want to apologize and take a brief time out to recreate a comfortable environment. So if you forget everything that you read or listened to about crucial conversations, learn to look, make it safe.
I just want to point out that this chapter has a nice table of all of their advice summarized with all the acronyms and all the steps under like the context of coaching. So this would be a good chapter if you're going to practice or implement this. This is where you want to look for don't go make a table. They have it in here for you.
Yeah. All right. Now, that's what the authors say are their main 2 points. But since this is both a book club and an episode, we'd be remiss if we didn't move into dissemination station. So, learn to look, make it safe. Final points from everybody after reading Crucial Conversation. Takeaways, things that you think they missed in terms of that big 2 list. Areas that you are going to be practicing tomorrow or whenever you go to work next.
My big takeaway is that do the work before you have the conversation. Don't be the person that just jumps into the conversation because you've read the book and you're ready to jump into something that may potentially be harmful for your relationship if you don't tread lightly, right? So really use time before you have that conversation to reflect, figure out what your heart is, like they said, figure out why you want to have the conversation, what's your end goal, Do you have this? You have the resources. Are you in a right place to have that without being defensive or angry, and getting yourself in the right position before you have that conversation? That's all.
Yeah, I think the silence versus violence, especially working in just sort of the era that we work in and thinking about, like, don't do all that prep and then be violent in your conversation with your prep. Because I think that could be a situation that people fall into of like, well, I've prepared and I know how this is going to go and we're going to make it go the way that I planned. It's not the purpose of that preparation. The purpose of that preparation is to be like a good listener and to come to let the other person have feedback and to recognize that they haven't prepared. And so you have to be in control of how you respond to them. So, and don't respond with silence or violence.
I think everyone has made some very important points. My point I want to make is not actually related to supervision, which might be bad since it's Supervision September, but I feel like particularly in this last chapter, there are some nice parallels that one could draw between working with clients in what we might call crucial interactions and a crucial conversation, right? Particularly these two main points. What is it? Learn to look, right? So looking to see, are you and your client sort of getting along? Do you have similar goals for the session or the time that you're together? And are you being aware of any indicators on their part of withdrawal of assent, right? Or if they're not having a good time in session, and then making it safe again. So if you're seeing that you are not driving in that way, that you back up, you don't push through whatever your agenda is, but rather you make it safe again by reestablishing that relationship so that the two of you can work towards whatever the common goal might be. So I just think that, I don't know, that might be a nice way to think about other things.
Very nice. All right, everybody. This brings us to the end of Crucial Conversations. Again, I think a book that we're all going to recommend, even though we have some qualms about some of the sections, we have some qualms about some of the tone. But in terms of content, we do agree is thumbs up for adding to not just your supervision, but possibly to your overall communication practice. But remembering that, as the authors say, the goal of this book is not to make you a great conversationalist or communicator. The goal is to develop plans and strategies for meaningful action where communication will need to be a part of that. So do keep that distinction in mind, that it's not just about, now I'm good at talking, because if all you do is talk and you forget that chapter about the make a plan or make an action plan, you're still going to find yourself not really making the progress that you want to see. Well, everyone, we really hope you enjoyed our end of Supervision September with our Supervision Book Club. Thank you again for supporting us on Patreon, so you can get the whole thing, the whole episode right now. You don't have to wait an extra week. Don't forget, that means there won't be an episode in your feed next week because you're getting 2 for 1 right now. But if you haven't listened to our last book club, Street Data, hey, now would be a good time to go back and catch up on that one. And remember, as long as you get your code words and go to the post on the Patreon page, you're going to get those for no additional charge. That's 4 CEs, 2 Supervision CEs. Wow, what a benefit. Again, thank you so much for supporting us. That second code word is BICEP, BICEP. It's a muscle of some kind, I think. In my time reading, not exercising like I should, so I don't really know where it is. It's somewhere on your body, right? BICEP. All right. Don't forget to head to the Patreon page to get your discount code word as well. That's going to be very important. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening to our Crucial Conversations Book Club. We'll be back with our next book club, which will be back to the voting bracket. So you're going to have an option to vote on book clubs a little bit later in the winter time. We'll get the exact dates out a little bit later, and we'll have those in the previews. Thank you again so much for supporting us, and we'll see you next time. Keep responding. Bye.